Hey guys, welcome to episode 4 of the Armchair Athlete podcast. I'm your host Patrick, and in today's episode we'll be discussing whether the media and fans are too quick to call for the sacking of head coaches and managers. But before we get into that, I just want to thank everyone for the support on recent episodes. Views have gone up a lot, which is when just starting out, it's really appreciated. So before we get further into it, I hope everyone can drop a like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments below what your thoughts on the topic are, and if there's any topics you want me to discuss a bit further in detail. But for now, let's discuss coaches. Across all sports in the world, the head coach or manager, depending on the sport and what they're called, is responsible for not only the tactics side of the game, but also setting the culture and the mentality for the team. And it's that approach which can see a manager become so beloved by a fan base such as Jurgen Klopp, bringing that mentality monsters to Liverpool. But when a manager struggles to do that, you can also see them lose the dressing room. But the tough thing, and the question I really want to delve into, is are we too quick to judge a coach based on the results when they're starting out and trying to develop that culture and develop that mentality? Because it may be a case of they don't have the right players yet. The players are still learning the tactics and the culture, and often for a new coach, they're coming into a team that was struggling beforehand. So can we really expect such big turnarounds that you often see? And I think this really became prevalent in my mind when we saw the Lakers fire Darvin Ham and then bring JJ Redick, and it was after 2 seasons that he was fired. And while personally I do think the team had stagnated a bit, and when you have your top players like LeBron James and Anthony Davis clearly unhappy with the way things are going, it's understandable that a front office will make a change in that instance. It is much cheaper for a front office to get rid of the coach rather than try and replace all the players. But I do think we as fans and the media need to take a step back and discuss whether we're allowing them enough time to really implement what they're trying to do. I mean, I've got some examples of coaches who have struggled at the start but were given that time to really develop and build and implement what they were after. And they're some of the best coaches across different sports in the history of sports. And so I think they're great case studies to see what can happen when you allow some time. And obviously you need to ensure that you're seeing improvements throughout each season. But when you have a case in the NBA as well last year, when you had Adrian Griffin, a first-time head coach, take a Bucks team to 30-13 in his first season. They were towards the top of the Eastern standings, just over half the season, and yet he seemingly lost the locker room, and which was a key point to him getting it, that Giannis was a big advocate for him, and that they were really liked his personality that they brought in after firing Coach Bud. And then seemingly after 43 games, he's lost the locker room despite the performance on court. They get rid of him and they bring in Doc Rivers, who hasn't really achieved much of note in recent times. So it raises the question as to, were the Bucks too quick to fire Adrian Griffin, and were the Lakers too quick to fire Darvin Ham? And as a Lakers fan, I don't think Darvin Ham was the right coach going forward. Some of the decisions he made, he just was unwilling to sort of go to what worked in the prior season when we made a conference finals run. He then never really played that lineup until later in the season, and you saw us turn some of that form around. He wasn't playing guys like Max Christie and things like that were frustrating as a fan. So I definitely thought it was time for him to go, but I do think when you look at it from kind of a bit more of an objective view, I think it's easy to see that maybe he should have been allowed another season. I mean, as I said, just made the conference finals, then an underperforming season where you go out to the Denver Nuggets, who are the reigning champions, and while they didn't repeat, they were definitely a bogey team for the Lakers and a team clearly struggled with, but they were competitive in that series. And so I think if you were kind of a neutral standing back, you could definitely see a world where the Lakers should have just kept Darvin Ham and rode with it, especially when you look at the fact they've then hired JJ Redick, a person with no coaching experience at all. And so it begs the question whether he'll be given the time to learn on the job and implement what his philosophies will be, because they'll be different to Darvin Ham, and is he going to get the time to properly teach the players that, and will he need to bring in new players to correctly implement those tactics that he does have? And so I think it's something we'll need to think about a bit more in general, and so I want to look at sort of cases where that managers or coaches have been given that time and how it sort of works. So the first coach I thought of when looking at this was Sir Alex Ferguson, who's renowned for being arguably the best manager or coach in all sports ever. I definitely think you could make that argument for what he achieved at Manchester United, although I hated it as a Liverpool fan. You can't deny what he was able to do, but I think the longevity he had, the success he had, he really took them to a point where they were just the powerhouse in world football. And so I think he's a great case study, because when you look here, he came in in 1986, I should say, after United sacked Ron Atkinson, and it wasn't until 1993 that they actually won their first Premier League title under him. So you think they've gone through all those years, so 6-7 years they've gone without winning a league title, and in that they did win a European Cup, but even that was still in 1990, so that's 4 years later. And so nowadays I'd be surprised to see a coach at a club the stature of Manchester United, who, while they weren't the same powerhouse that he took them to, were still highly regarded and still seen as a top team. Took them for 4 years, didn't win a league title, but he was given that time and trust from the front office to actually build what he wanted, get the players and recruitments he was after in order to get the structure and propel them to that success. And so when you compare that to coaches who are being fired halfway through their first season, only after a couple seasons, and it's not even just that that's when they're fired, but there's near year-long drawn-out processes and media headlines around the person's job being unsafe. And so you're seeing it now in the AFL with Simon Goodwin, who's a premiership winning coach for Melbourne, and now they're a bit shaky. They've got off-field issues, and it's all looking at him as to whether he's the right man to stick around. And you kind of, part of you wants to go, well, hang on, he's won the premiership for this club and he's done so much. They hadn't won a flag in near 60 years, I believe, and so to do that, they've been towards the top of the table in those years. They're still regarded, although this season is down, you'd still regard their list as it is, as quite a top one, and one of the better ones in the league, but their injuries have derailed them, off-field issues have derailed them, and I would be surprised if they say, given the current culture. I kind of expect it at this stage, but I think it would be a mistake to sack him, because surely someone with that identity knows what's required to win a premiership is the person you want in a rebuild, who can structure and can show the young players coming through that they'll need to bring in, show the new talents what is required and what's expected, and lay down the law. Whereas if you have a new coach learning on the job, and then a new class of recruits coming through who then are also trying to learn, it can inevitably lead to kind of blind leading the blind and struggle. You need to allow time for people to get better and people to learn and get there. So I think the media headlines, just as soon as a form drops a bit in a side, it's just instantly, the coach should sack, is the right job, should they bring in this person? And it's across all sports, which is the kind of wild thing. You definitely get in the NBA, as I mentioned earlier, with Adrian Griffin and Darvin Ham. You then see it in the Premier League as well. You see coaches sacked. I think there was a coach sacked either last season or the season before, within, I think it was like 30-something days. And so what is a coach meant to do in that time to implement? And then you get in the AFL all these calls for the coaches during the season. Matthew Nicks was also, from the Crows, was also talked about whether he should stay and whether he should leave. And My biggest thing when it comes to coaching is do not fire the coach unless you know who you want the replacement to be. If you know you've got a better option, sure, that is the same as trading a player for a player. You're getting a better player. That I understand and I can live with. It's when it seemingly goes, no, things aren't going how we wanted. We're going to sack this coach. All right, we've sacked him. Who should we try and bring in? Who's available? What are we going to do? And it's at that point you're like, okay, what was your plan? Did you just sack him for the sake of sacking him? I mean, there are some instances where you kind of need to just get them out of the club and kind of allow, if the vibes were so low, get them out of the club and kind of refresh. I think that was kind of logic with the Lakers. They got rid of Darvingham. It was at the end of the season as well, so they knew they had the whole season, or whole off season, I should say, to find their recruit. It was clear from the start that JJ Redick was one of the front runners. They went after the UConn coach, whose name's escaping me at the moment, but they at least knew when they had the time. It wasn't a mid-season sacking when also the team's trying to get up for the games and things like that. So for me, it's just the number of times you see teams and clubs just sack a coach and then not have a plan after that is ridiculous. You saw it in the AFL with West Coast when they've sacked Adam Simpson, and it's almost as if they thought getting Dean Cox in was going to be a given. That was no question. He was going to be brought in. That's what was going to happen. And so when he's now said no and he's going to stay at Sydney, and then you've had Nathan Buckley remove himself from that consideration, and some other former coaches have said they're not taking that job, you then go, well, hang on, where are you? What was your plan with this? You had Adam Simpson, who's a premiership winning coach. Yeah, West Coast weren't looking great, but surely you could have at least seen out the last 5 weeks of the season and maybe announce at the end of the season, this is done, you have a big farewell for such a great coach at your club, and then you can take the off season. But now I understand they're not playing for much, but it just seems to throw things into a bit of chaos during the season, which just feels a bit unnecessary. And so it's one of the things that really irks me in sports is how quick people are to be thrown, and coaches and managers specifically are to be thrown under the bus. And it's the extremes, and it's probably the hunt for clicks and views that drives it, because saying outlandish things is what will drive in views and will drive in clicks. It's how shows like First Take in America with Stephen A. Smith are so popular, because they say some of the wild things, and you listen to them and you go, that's ridiculous, like what are you going on about? It's always one extreme or the other. There's never just a reasonable kind of middle ground, like a simple like, oh yeah, I can see where that's coming from, or let's not quite say this, let's not say he's the best player in the league, but we can see that he's a very good player in the league. It's always one extreme or the other, and that just farms those clicks and views. And that's probably why the media and the calls for sacking are so prevalent, especially because fans will feed off that from the media, so it's that back and forth. And I think it's just something that sports as a whole could really do with taking a step back of. And the Sir Alex Ferguson example I went through, where he didn't win a title at all until 1990, when they won the FA Cup, which is 4 years after he was signed. And in that period of time, in 1989, so 3 years later, they broke the British transfer record to sign Gary Pallister. So they've then, even though he hadn't won anything in the first few years, the Man United head office have backed him to spend the money. And it's funny now, at the time it was £2.3 million was the British transfer record, whereas that's what some players are earning a fortnight seemingly. So it's interesting how much the game's changed, and it's probably a big reason why, given there's so much money in it, why teams make such quick decisions with things, where they will go on and they'll want quick results and turnarounds, because they, in the soccer, like missing out on the top four in the Premier League can cost teams hundreds of millions of dollars, and that then will impact their transfers and then trying to get back into it. So I definitely get that. But when you can see the vision we can see the vision in a team progressing, even if it's just slowly and incrementally, if things are constantly improving and you are following a plan, at least if you give it some time, at least if you can give it 4 or 5 years to really at least start to progress, then you can have a look and go, okay, well, we've got a clear sample size. Are we on track given this period to reach our goals? And if not, okay, what can we change then? And so it just seems there's such short-term thinking, which very rarely will get you results in sports. It's about having those long-term plans and building things, like how the Warriors dynasty was built primarily through the draft, in the fact that they drafted Clay and Steph and Draymond. And then you've got the Bulls, they drafted Jordan and Pippen, and the Spurs in their drafting. You then got Liverpool's teams in recent years under Klopp. It was slowly, incrementally built. We brought in Mane, and then we sold Coutinho, who was arguably our best player at the time. We bring in Van Dijk and Alisson, and then we signed Salah, and it's the evolving nature of it, where you're just looking for those incremental improvements that can create long-term success. And Liverpool didn't win leagues and leagues and leagues, but compared to the success in prior years, winning the Premier League and getting the points tallies they did, and being unlucky to not win more, but then also winning Club World Cup, the Champions League, and having 2 other finals in the Champions League. They won the FA Cup, won the League Cup. Like, those things do stack up, and so it's a case where just having a plan and sticking to that and being able to execute is what sports needs at this time. But the almost short-termism within the media and fans just won't allow the patience and kind of to let that happen. And another example within the AFL of where I think patience is shown to pay off and to be worth it is with Damien Hardwick, a former coach of Richmond and now the coach of the Gold Coast Suns. He, in his first 6 years at Richmond, so he was hired in 2010 all the way up and including the 2016 season, so that's actually first 7 seasons there. He played a total of 3 finals games as a whole. In 7 seasons, they played 3 finals games in 3 different seasons where they lost each of them. And even for his whole career as a Richmond coach, or his whole career actually as a coach in general, because this does take into account this season as at Gold Coast, he's only just above 50% in terms of his win rate. Yet he's regarded as one of the best AFL coaches in the modern era, because after that first 7 seasons and they were building together, bear in mind that building was still there was developing players like Trent Cotchin, Dustin Martin, Jack Riewoldt in their team. And then in 2017, they win the premiership. In 2018, I believe they lost in the prelim maybe, or the semi-final. They then win the premiership the following season. And so you think they were able to do that. They were one of the best teams from 2017 to 2021, 2022. They were arguably the best team in the comp for those seasons. And it was they were able to get there, I should say, because they could build and they had patience and there was the incremental improvements to get there. I remember when I was watching AFL in that sort of early teens, like that 2010 to 2013, or probably even a bit before 2010 as well. I remember watching it and it just felt like a given every year it was going to be Richmond in the bottom 3. If you had have told me then that Richmond were going to win a flag within 10 years, I would have been mind blown. But they stuck with it, they kept patient, and then look where they got in the end. And so I think it's just more evidence that teams are too quick and patience can pay off. And the last example, I'll go through this as well, is in the NFL. So I've got 3 different sports, 3 different countries, all different styles and game plans where a bit of patience can pay off. And the last example I've got is with Bill Belichick, the famous head coach of the New England Patriots for their dynasty, big part as well due to Tom Brady and his success. But the patience is in a different way, where his second season is when they actually were the Super Bowl champions at New England. That, I believe, that was the year Tom Brady came in after he was the backup string, or the second string quarterback, like backup quarterback, and came in, and then they went on to win the Super Bowl. But it's patience and recognizing that people, just because someone's failed previously doesn't mean they'll fail this time. They can learn, and people do learn, because prior to his time at New England, where he joined in the year 2000, from 1991 to 1995, he was actually the head coach at Cleveland, and didn't have a great record there. Made the playoffs once, where they won one playoff game. That was the only year they got more than 7 wins, and so that shows for New England to hire him, and then for him to win in that second season, then go on to have the dynasty that he had with 7 Super Bowls wins. It shows that patience can, and recognizing that people learn from previous experience and past mistakes, and understanding that can pay off. Because who knows what would have happened if Cleveland had kept him after 1995, if they'd stuck around and given him a bit more time to learn a job. Maybe he would have been able to bring success to Cleveland. And it is a big debate within the NFL community as to whether the Patriots dynasty was down to Tom Brady or if it was down to Bill Belichick. It seems to be whatever the argument is. If you're arguing against Tom Brady, you say it's all Bill Belichick, and if you're arguing against Bill Belichick, you say it was all Tom Brady. The truth is definitely in the middle, that they both kind of need each other to get there. But who knows what Cleveland would have done had they kept Bill Belichick. And for New England to then bring him on and go from there was another state where people learn, and we see it with players all the time, where it's they come in young, and it's they're just learning, getting their feet under them, they adapting to the new game. It's faster, it's at this level, it's stronger at this level, they're playing against men at this level, all those different things. Yet with coaches, it's near instant, well, what you're trying to do should work, and that you should just be able to implement it. So I think it's tough to see, honestly, when coaches aren't given the leeway they probably deserve, given how much he's involved in that job. And because you think everything they've got to account for in the sport. I mean, I'll use football as an example and what Jurgen Klopp did, because to me personally, and it's definitely biased because I'm a Liverpool fan, but the way he galvanised essentially a city with Liverpool to be us versus the rest of the world. And Liverpool as a city has been like that, and Merseyside as a whole has been like that. The common thread of Scouse, not English, definitely, but the fact he was able to so quickly target, I don't want to say target that audience, because I think it is naturally who he is, but how he was so quickly able to relate to that and feel a part of Liverpool as a culture, especially because it's not as if he's English and he came in so he knew a bit about Merseyside. He's coming from Germany, still learning to speak English, and he gets there and it's instantly I'm the normal one, and this turned doubters into believers, the hallmark of his entire career at Liverpool that he stuck with. And so he had to turn a club that had so much expectation on it, given the stature of it. Like, Liverpool is regarded, even when they were struggling and didn't win a Premier League title for 20 odd years. They were regarded and so well known as one of the biggest clubs in the world. It took a long time for United and a lot of premierships for them to overlap Liverpool's English title wins, and so they have that stature, and he was able to come in. He had to turn a squad that was not even just underachieving, but just wasn't very good for what the aspirations were, and it wasn't good enough for what the aspirations were, I should say. He was able to galvanize them together, turn that into a cup final, or two cup finals that season, one of which I believe Liverpool had already qualified under Brendan Rodgers for, but then came to the Europa League final. Which required, especially when you come in during the season, I think it's even more commendable how he was able to do it, because he had to galvanize the team to perform, implement tactics that the current players could understand and could be utilized doing and fit what they're after, but also try and implement tactics for what his end goal of the team was, and how he wanted them to play. And so after that, so that's just the on-field side, trying to work out the tactics of the current squad and what he wants, because you need to start building for what you want. It can't just be what you have, because otherwise you just kind of end up in a loop back around it, and essentially you can get mediocre players to overperform, but you're not going to be able to really get to that top level without those tactics. And so he was able to build for that. He then also did it on a restricted budget, which is in football, I think, is very difficult. It's like, imagine if somehow JJ Redick it's essentially if JJ Redick came into Liverpool came into the Lakers now, and they were like, cool, the salary cap is essentially half for you what it is for other teams. Warriors, Celtics, they can spend as much as they want, you get half that. And he has to try and make that work and try and get there. And so it's I've said commendable a few times, because to me that's just the best word I can use to describe it, and how he was able to do that, and it just the complexity into which his role had, because you've also got to be media trained to be the forefront. When there's issues off field, you've got to be a spokesperson as well, and you've got to be able to speak about those things in a respectful manner, and handle it well, and handle those questions when things aren't going well too. You've got to be able to handle that. And so that's all stuff that the media can see it, and the fans can see. It's that on field, it's the press conferences, and then behind the scenes, you've got to make sure all your staff and your assistant staff are happy, and make sure they're getting the input and liaising with them, and how that's working, the different personalities in the locker room, make sure they're all meshing, you can relate to them, because relating to a 34-year-old who's winding down their career is very different to a 18-year-old who's just starting and just come out of school and is just starting their career, and no idea. They're almost two different worlds, and trying to be able to relate to both and make sure they're both comfortable and make sure they're connecting, it's a lot for managers and coaches to take on. And when you look at in the NFL, you got 53-man squads. The NBA are smaller teams, and the fact it's a 15-man roster plus some G League players, so they're smaller teams, so it can be a bit easier potentially in the NBA to, well, it's easier because there's less people, and then you look at the in baseball, it's 40-man squads, plus then you also got to work out the AAA, AA, single A connections as well, because you got to be thinking about that. Then Premier League have big squads, because you've also got the youth academy they want to try and use, and in the AFL you got massive squads, and so there's so much going on. Add to that, you're constantly in the headlines yourself, so you've got to work and make sure you're able to cope with that and deal with that, and when there's negative press, you got to be able to either avoid it, which can be difficult, or cope with it while handling everything else, which can also be difficult. And then on top of all of that, you have your own personal life, which can have its struggles. The personal life can have its struggles, and during his time at Liverpool, Jurgen Klopp, I believe, dealt with the passing of his mother, which would have been a huge amount of stress and grieving, and the mental toll that would have taken, while then trying to deal with everything that goes with being a coach. And you got to hope he had the right support network in, and from an outside view, it does seem as though he did. It's always tough to say unless you're there, but he, to deal with losing a parent and a loved one, something that traumatic and that can take so much out of you, to deal with that while dealing with everything else going on, and then the players also then go through that, and you've got to make sure dealing with those personal struggles, like when with Liverpool, when Alisson lost his father, and working out balancing the team versus the personal side of being an athlete, when I believe it was during COVID, and it was a case when he wasn't able to travel to Brazil to be at the funeral, but giving him, making sure he's supported and being there for him. That's something the head coach has to take on and be responsible for, not just necessarily being the person that they come to, although they should be able to be someone they can go to, but just making sure they've got the right pieces in place so there's a support network as well. And so there's so much that goes into it, and very rarely do you see lightning kind of strike immediately where a coach takes off. I mean, in the Bulls dynasty, I believe Phil Jackson, it was his second season, was 1991. I think it was hired in 1990. So 1991, they start their first three-peat, and so things obviously were great for near straight away for them. And I think Greg Popovich's time at the Spurs, who's another amazing coach, he won relatively quickly once becoming a head coach, if my memory serves me right. But it's not very common you get that, and you see way more situations where a caretaker manager comes in and they just lightning will strike straight away, or not lightning will strike, but there'll be a kind of flash in the pan, I should say. When the new manager bounces, you see it most prominently, I would say, in soccer. You see it when the new manager comes in and they win the first few games, or at least the team looks much better. Ole Gunnar Solskjaer is, I think, the biggest example of this during his time at Manchester United, and a case when he was caretaker manager and the team was looking amazing. And then once he gets the full-time job, they struggle. You don't really know what's real. Was the caretaker manager side real and they're just in a bit of bad form right now? Or has he kind of been found out and now they're looking at maybe he shouldn't be the coach? And it's always tough, and they were a bit more patient than a lot of other teams have been. So, which I think was good for them to be a bit more patient, or at least allow time to develop and know what was real, and they were able to see that yes, he wasn't good enough, but at least it was very clear it wasn't a very reactionary decision. There was enough sample size that he wasn't the guy, right? And so I think that's more common with caretaker managers, and I just think that you at least need to allow one caretaker managers, when they perform well, to be able to. I think a caretaker manager, if they get some decent results, they should be given the opportunity to get it full-time, assuming it's something they want. Not all assistant managers want to be a head coach, and so obviously that's something you've got to take into account. And other factors, I think if it's someone I think in the organization you believe could be the head coach, I think you should give them a try, unless there's some instances where maybe you want them to be the coach after the next coach and get some more experience. That can also happen too. But I think it's about making sure decisions from decisions aren't reactionary, but instead are based on evidence and they've been tested, I guess, and there's good sample evidence in what they can do. And so, but I think the biggest problem, or not the biggest problem in sports, but one of the biggest ones that grinds my gear is just how impatient fans and the media are when it comes to coaches, and not giving them the respect they deserve for how difficult that job is and what's required to deal with everything going on. And so I think it's tough. And when you also see in interviews how near restricted that it feels that both players and managers are with their responses, they've got to be quite generic. In a lot of sports now, they can't really say anything too negative or too positive, or not too positive, but they can't say anything too negative or can't hit back too much. You don't really get to see that, because then that just creates more media scrutiny, and so it feels like at times they almost can't speak up for themselves, which is always tough in any profession. But I think it's just something as a whole the sports world should look at, but I also, it's not something I can see changing. I think it will require a bit more. It'll be a bit more in individual cases and teams in which that'll be applied. But as a sporting world, it's just going to probably continue further down the other way. And it's a case of, if you're not performing straight away, you've got to be gone. And it's tough to see, and it's a real shame, because of how a new coach is really expected to get the opportunities and prove themselves if they're getting if they're kind of getting sacked and getting fired so quickly, how they're going to get that experience. And it makes me really wonder how successful JJ Redick will be at the Lakers, given no experience. So he's going to be learning on the job about everything. And well, you could tell from his podcast, he's a great basketball mind. He's definitely got the mind for it, the day-to-day operations and everything that goes into it. Because I didn't even mention the fact, in addition to everything else you've also got to then think about the recruitment side of it, and talking to new players and contract negotiations for yourself, for the players on the team. How's that all work? Trades, transfers. Like, that's a whole nother side of things you got to deal with in that media rumors and screening that comes. So it is a whole nother side. And how will JJ Redick handle all of that, and doing it at such a high profile team? Like the Lakers, I would say the biggest team in the NBA. I think the most well known, given their branding. And so to come in, he's playing with LeBron James. He's the biggest basketballer in the world from a name value, and probably the biggest athlete in the world from a name value standpoint. Him and Messi, I think, would be the two up there. And so to do it all in that situation, plus the fact the front office of the Lakers have proven to have a championship or bust mentality when it comes to coaches and their success, which is flawed from the start. If he made it to the end of this season, I think that's kind of like one check mark for him, like that he'll mentally be trying to get through. If he gets past 2 years and gets into a third season, the Lakers must have been doing really well. He must have been able to lightning strike straight away, like how he did with Pat Riley for the Lakers years ago when he was brought in straight away. And there's been rumours that the Lakers front office has compared JJ Redick to Pat Riley, which is a big claim given Pat Riley's success, and not necessarily fully accurate in the sense of, I think Pat Riley was the comparison because he went straight from the media team into the head coach, but it didn't account for before he was in the media team, he was assistant, so he did have some prior experience. But the front office, that championship will bust, and it's a case of, I think I've mentioned this in earlier episodes, it's a great slogan and like idea to be like, this is what we stand for, almost that Kobe Bryant Mamba mentality that he pushed for, that job's not done, win a championship, that's what matters. But you can't hold a coach or a manager to the standard of, did you win the championship or not? There has to be other metrics that go into determining a good season. I think it's the only instance where that is a fair comparison would be if you are the coach, if you're Steve Kerr when you had the Warriors dynasty with Kevin Durant. Those teams, if they didn't win the championships there, and I know they lost the comeback and they did lose to the Raptors, both of which did have injuries in them, and I think the 3-1 comeback was a bit of a fluke in the sense of it's only ever happened once. They learned from it, they went back. So if you're the coach of a team that's got that dynasty and is so clearly head and shoulders better than everyone, I think that, and you've got a history of winning, I think then you can be held to that standard. Or if you're the other way where you're, say, a Joe Mazzulla in the, sticking with the NBA, where you've gone to the finals, you're clearly the best team in your conference, you dominate the regular season multiple times, and if you then get to the NBA finals multiple times and say they got there this year and lost, and then next year they get there and lost, I think at that point you're then going, okay, well, our team hasn't really changed, we're still the best team, you just can't get that finals, you can't get over it in the hump in the finals, and so we need a coach who can. I think then that's an instance, but they're very rare cases, and to me they're actually quite specific to, I mean, obviously there is examples where specific to the NBA, but I think those situations don't necessarily happen too often in other sports. I guess you could have it maybe potentially in the NFL with Kyle Shanahan, where they've lost to the Chiefs a couple of times in recent years, and then they lost to the Rams the year we won the Super Bowl, and they lost in the NFC Championship game, and so that maybe you could start that discussion where he could be held to you need to win the championship or it's a bit of a failure, I think. But they're such specific teams where it requires the teams itself to be head and shoulders above the rest of the competition. They've had experience where they've been able to implement the idea, so it's like, okay, this is clearly your team now. It's your tactics, you're running the ship, everything's how you want it. If it doesn't work, it does kind of fall on you. Like, we've clearly got the team to be able to do it. You've had the time to essentially learn and implement the culture and team. It's up to you now to get it done in the biggest games. So in that instance, that's when that mentality works. But the Lakers can't bring it in for JJ Redick and be like, oh, hey, we're hiring you with no experience in coaching above like a high school. I don't even think he's like a high school coach. I think it's like a primary school in Australia, in other countries, whatever is high school. It's essentially, he's coaching like that level. I believe jumping from that to the NBA is obviously wildly different. And so if you're then like, okay, we'll come in with a team that last year finished 10th or 9th, I think, in the table, at least was in the play-in, so you weren't even a full playoff team, lost in the first round, hasn't signed anyone in free agency, hasn't made any significant trades. Your best player, or your second best player and your biggest name is 40 years old and playing in his 21st or 22nd NBA season. That's a lot to ask of a person, to the point where it's so unrealistic. But I also can't trust that that's not what they're thinking. And so it frustrates me. And if JJ Redick doesn't work out as a coach, you'd have to hope Jeannie Buss asks questions of Rob Pelinka. I feel like that's then where the bigger issue is, rather than for the coach itself. But time will tell when it comes to that. I just hope he's given the patience to be able to get there. And I think that's kind of I guess this video has been a bit of just a rant for me, trying to get that off my chest, my thoughts relating to coaching as a whole. I know I definitely went on some tangents throughout it, and you can tell when I've not always worded things best throughout this episode, and I'll see in common themes. My brain can go at 1,000 miles an hour trying to get all my thoughts out at once and coherently, and got to make sure I catch up. But I guess the summary of this video is the media and fans need to be more patient when it comes to managers and head coaches. They need to give them more respect for the roles they do and all that goes into their job positions and what's required. And it can only be done with a whole culture shift. Is the only way I can see it change. But we'll see how it all plays out. It'll go into next season. We'll revisit when there's inevitably coaching changes across different sports, and seeing how that plays out. But I do appreciate you all listening. I'm not going to go through the AFL results today and look to this weekend. We'll probably skip that and look at it more once we get to the end of the season. I mean, I think my tips absolutely went to shit from last week, so it'll be interesting to see how wrong my table predictor is. I mean, Carlton being the premiers looks very unlikely, and then Suns making finals also looks very unlikely, so it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out. But as always, and as I said earlier, let me know in the comments below what your thoughts are regarding this, and if there's any topics you want me to discuss. All engagement and comments and suggestions, any advice as well. I've slightly changed up this setup and got more changes coming just to try and improve it a bit, just to keep it getting better and keep hopefully slowly building it and keep improving it. As we're now 4 episodes in, so I'm really hope you enjoyed the episode, and I'm probably just going to keep going at a tangent if I don't wrap this up. So I appreciate you listening. As I said, don't forget to leave a comment, like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and you'll not miss the next episode. And eventually I will work out a kind of regular schedule for when these will drop, but for now just hit that notification bell so you know when they do go live. And yeah, let me know anything else you want to discuss. But otherwise, hope you have a good weekend and go Australia in the Olympics.